Most people have seen the statue of Lady Justice, a woman holding a sword in one hand, a scale in the other, and a blindfold covering her eyes. The story attached to that blindfold is comforting. Justice is supposed to be blind to wealth, status, influence, or appearance. It judges only the facts, only the truth. Hiromi Higuruma believed in that story. He passed one of Japan's hardest bar exams and became a criminal defense lawyer, taking cases that most attorneys avoided. Not because they were profitable, most of his clients had nothing, but because someone had to stand in the corner of people the system had already decided to abandon. But Higuruma belief in justice was never naive. Before becoming a lawyer, one of his professors asked why he did not simply become a judge instead. His answer was revealing. Higuruma said he could not become a judge because he believed humans were ugly and weak. A judge stands above human depravity and delivers clean verdicts from a distance. Higuruma wanted the opposite. He believed he should confront that ugliness directly. That philosophy shaped the kind of lawyer he became. He deliberately chose the hardest cases, cases all lawyers avoided, cases filled with liars, resentment, violence, and hopelessness. When questioned about it, Higuruma dismissed easy work as something that would dull the brain.
もう日車さん、なんで受けたんですか、こんな案件。
たまにはいいだろう。楽な仕事ばかりじゃ腕が鈍る。
But that explanation feels more like rationalization than truth. Higuruma was not avoiding the abyss. He was searching for it. Part of him believed there was honesty in staring directly at humanity's worst aspect without turning away. If human beings were selfish, weak, and desperate, then pretending otherwise would only be another form of delusion. By defending society's ugliest cases, Higuruma convinced himself he was confronting reality more honestly than everyone else. But there's a difference between understanding darkness and living inside it. Japan's legal system only accelerates that descent. In Japan, the criminal conviction rate is famously above 99%, not because guilt is always certain, but because prosecutors rarely pursue cases they are not already confident they can win. Once someone enters the system as a defendant, the outcome is often decided long before the trials begin. Higuruma understood this better than anyone. He knew the system was imperfect. He knew innocent people would be crushed by it. He knew courts were not pure manifestation of truth, but institutions built by flawed human beings. And despite knowing all of that, he entered the system anyway, because Higuruma believed he could endure it. He believed he could stand inside human ugliness without becoming consumed by it. The thing that ultimately destroyed Higuruma was not simply losing cases. It was people. Throughout his career, Higuruma occasionally succeeded. He reduced sentences. He found inconsistency in prosecutions. Sometimes he even managed to protect clients from punishments that once seemed inevitable. But even those victories carried bitterness. One flashback reveals a client whose sentence Higuruma successfully reduced. From a legal perspective, it was a win. Yet the client still looked dissatisfied, angry, because what they wanted was not mercy, not effort, not partial salvation. They wanted complete freedom. And when reality failed to match that expectation, The resentment turned towards the one person who had actually tried to help them. That moment quietly reveals the core of Higuruma's disillusionment. He was not merely confronting a broken legal system. He was confronting human nature itself, the entitlement, the selfishness, the inability to recognize effort unless it produces perfect outcomes. Again and again, Higuruma placed himself in the ugliest corner of society, believing he could value human depravity as a form of honesty. But over time, that philosophy began to rot from the inside. What he once framed as intellectual maturity slowly became emotional exhaustion. The final collapse came with the case of Keita Oe. Keita was accused of murdering a mother and daughter in Morioka. Higuruma took the case despite how hopeless it seemed. He built a defense, challenged the prosecution, and fought against a system already leaning towards conviction. It changed nothing. The verdict came down guilty, life imprisonment, and Higuruma was forced to stand in the courtroom and watch another human being disappear into the machinery he had spent his entire career trying to resist. But the verdict itself was not the worst part. The worst part was Keita's expression. Not rage, not hatred, something quieter than that. Disappointment. A look that seemed to ask, "Why couldn't you save me?" That moment matters because the legal system itself has no face. Institutions cannot feel shame. Courts cannot absorb sorrow. System cannot look someone in the eyes while their life collapses. But Higuruma could. So all the grief, resentment, and helplessness surrounding the verdict, landing on the one person in the room who had actually tried to help. And eventually, something inside him snapped. At that exact moment, his curse technique awakened, not during a battle, not during a heroic revelation. Inside a courtroom, inside the very system that had slowly hollowed him out, a Shikigami named Judgement appeared behind him, and Higuruma killed the judge and prosecutor. The act was monstrous. Higuruma himself understands that. But psychologically, the moment feels horrifyingly coherent. For years, Higuruma convinced himself that human ugliness was something he could calmly observe, something he could endure through intellect alone. But eventually, the weight of constant exposure shattered that illusion. He stopped seeing depravity as something profound. He stopped seeing it as something that should be valued. It was simply ugly. And once he reached that conclusion, the rules he had dedicated his life to no longer looked meaningful. They looked complicit. After the courtroom massacre, Higuruma enters the calling game as someone fundamentally changed. Not because he suddenly became evil, but because he stopped believing justice and morality were the same thing. That distinction is what defines deadly sentencing. On the surface, Higuruma's domain expansion resembles a courtroom. There are rules, procedures, evidence, and verdicts. A Shikigami named Judgement oversees the trial, while Higuruma acts as prosecutor against the accused. But psychologically, the domain is far more revealing than that. Deadly sentencing is not Higuruma creating a fair legal system. It is Higuruma recreating the emotional structure of the system that destroyed him. The courtroom inside the domain is cold, rigid, and mechanical. Guillotines line the walls. Punishment is embedded into the architecture itself. Judgment's eyes remain sewn shut until the exact moment a verdict is delivered, as though judgment itself exists independently from empathy. Even the role Higuruma chooses inside the domain matters. In real life, he spent years as a defense attorney, protecting people abandoned by society. But inside deadly sentencing, he became the prosecutor instead, the side of the courtroom backed by institutional power, certainty, and punishment. That transformation is deeply ironic. The man who once fought against the system unconsciously rebuilds it around himself, and in doing so, he reveals the final stage of his philosophical collapse. At first, Higuruma believed human depravity was something that should be acknowledged honestly. Later, after years of disappointment, he concluded that people were simply ugly and weak. But deadly sentencing goes even further than cynicism. The domain suggests that Higuruma no longer trusts human beings enough for justice to remain human at all. Judgment does not care about context. It does not care about emotional nuance, personal history, or rehabilitation. It determines guilt and punishment with mechanical certainty. In other words, Higuruma creates a system where empathy itself becomes unnecessary. This is the true tragedy of his transformations. For all his hatred toward the legal system, deadly sentencing ultimately mirrors the exact thing he despised: a structure that reduces human beings into verdicts. And Higuruma knows this. One of the most important aspects of his character is that he never fully lies to himself about what he has become. He understands that murdering the judge and prosecutor was wrong. He understands that his ideology has turned punitive and distorted. But he continues forward anyway, because once Higuruma lost faith in human goodness, judgment became easier than understanding. The domain is not the manifestation of justice. It is the manifestation of exhaustion. A man who spent years trying to protect flawed people eventually reached a point where punishment felt simpler than hope. By the time Higuruma meets Yuji Itadori, his worldview is already complete. Human beings are selfish, institutions are corrupt, justice inevitably collapses into power. And underneath every defense, every excuse, every performance of innocence, people will ultimately choose self-preservation. That is the assumption Higuruma carries into deadly sentencing when he places Yuji on trial. At first, the process unfolds exactly as expected. Judgment accuses Yuji of entering a pachinko parlor while underage, a minor crime, almost trivial compared to the violence surrounding the cooling game. Yuji stumbles through the trial, loses the case, and has his cursed energy confiscated. To Higuruma, this is familiar territory. Another defendant cornered by prosecutor. Another person struggling to survive inside judgment. Then the retrial begins, and everything changes. Judgment presents a new accusation: mass murder during the Shibuya incident. Hundreds of civilians killed. At this point, Higuruma already knows the truth. His domain grants him access to the facts surrounding the case. He knows Ryomen Sukuna was responsible for the massacre after taking control of Yuji's body. Legally speaking, Yuji is not guilty. But Yuji confesses anyway. That confession becomes one of the most important moments in Higuruma's entire character arc, because it completely breaks the logic he has constructed around humanity. For years, Higuruma watched people lie, manipulate language, avoid accountability, and shift blame in order to protect themselves. Even guilty people frame themselves as victims if it meant escaping punishment. Yuji does the opposite. He accepts responsibility for something he technically did not choose, not because law demands it, not because he believes he can win with sympathy, but because he cannot emotionally separate himself from the death Sukuna caused using his body. To Yuji, legal innocence changes nothing. People still died with his hands. That distinction between legal guilt and moral guilt is precisely what destabilized Higuruma. For the first time in years, he encounters someone whose instinct is not self-preservation, someone willing to carry responsibility even when the system itself would excuse him. And suddenly, the worldview Higuruma built after years of disappointment begins to crack. Because cynicism only functions if human beings are predictable. Yuji is not predictable. He does not fit inside the emotional model Higuruma created to explain the world. That realization matters more than the trial itself. When Higuruma dispels the executioner's sword instead of killing Yuji, it is not simply an act of mercy. It is the first moment in years where Higuruma chooses understanding over judgment. Yuji reminds him of the person he used to be, before exhaustion transformed justice into punishment. More importantly, Yuji forces Higuruma to confront something terrifying. If even one person can genuinely accept responsibility without coercion, then maybe his cynicism was incomplete. Maybe humanity cannot be reduced entirely to selfishness. That possibility does not redeem Higuruma instantly. It does not erase the murders he committed or restore his faith in institutions. But it creates something his worldview had almost entirely lost: doubt. And doubt becomes the first crack in deadly sentencing itself. Because it suggests that Higuruma has not rediscovered blind faith in justice. What he rediscovered is something smaller, quieter, and far more human. The possibility that responsibility can still exist without force. And for someone who spent years drowning in human ugliness, that tiny possibility is enough to pull him back from the abyss. Higuruma's tragedy becomes more interesting when viewed philosophically, because he is not simply a fallen idealist. He never truly believed humanity was pure to begin with. From the start, Higuruma already saw people as selfish, dishonest, and weak. Unlike traditional heroic lawyers who believe the legal system merely needs reform, Higuruma entered the profession fully aware of human ugliness. What makes him tragic is that he believed he could endure that ugliness indefinitely without losing himself to it. That belief resembles a particular form of modern cynicism. Not cynicism in the casual sense of sarcasm or pessimism, but the deeper belief that human corruption is inevitable and that institutions merely reflect the selfishness of the people inside them. Over time, Higuruma begins viewing courts, laws, and even morality itself as extension of human weakness rather than protection against it. At first, he tries to intellectualize this perspective. His statement that he should value human depravity sounds philosophical, almost mature, as if acknowledging humanity's darkness honestly makes him wiser than people who cling to comforting illusion. But the longer Higuruma remains inside the legal system, the more that philosophy begins to resemble a coping mechanism. He deliberately chooses the ugliest cases. He surrounds himself with liars, resentment, violence, and hopelessness. He repeatedly exposes himself to the worst part of humanity while convincing himself that enduring it makes him intellectually honest. In reality, it resembles a form of emotional self-destruction. Higuruma mistakes prolonged exposure to suffering for strength, and eventually, the weight of that exposure collapsed the entire philosophy holding him together. This is where his character strongly echoes existentialist thought, especially the ideas of Albert Camus. Camus argued that humans naturally search for meaning and justice inside a world fundamentally indifferent to both. The confrontation between humanity's desire for meaning and reality's refusal to provide it creates what Camus called the absurd. Higuruma embodies that confrontation perfectly. He enters the legal system hoping justice can exist despite human corruption. But over time, he discovers that the system cannot fully separate truth from power, morality from procedure, or innocence from institutional convenience. The deeper he searches for justice, the more artificial justice begins to look. Deadly sentencing itself feels like an absurd response to that realization. Unable to trust human judgment anymore, Higuruma creates a courtroom stripped of emotional ambiguity. Judgment delivers punishment mechanically, almost inhumanly, as though objectivity can only exist once empathy disappears entirely. But even that solution fails, because Yuji Itadori introduced something Higuruma cynicism cannot explain: voluntary responsibility. And that moment reveals the hidden weakness inside Higuruma's worldview. Cynicism often presents itself as realism. It claims to see humanity more clearly than hope does. But cynicism also depends on predictability. It assumes selfishness is universal. It reduces people into patterns. Yuji breaks the patterns by accepting responsibility without coercion. Yuji forces Higuruma to confront the possibility that his understanding of humanity was incomplete. Not entirely wrong, but incomplete. That distinction matters because Higuruma never becomes a true nihilist. A nihilist would conclude that morality itself is meaningless. Higuruma never fully reaches that point. Even after killing the judge and prosecutor, he still recognizes his own guilt. He never stopped distinguishing between justice and cruelty, even when he becomes capable of both. In that sense, Higuruma remains painfully moral through his entire collapse. He is not someone who stopped caring about right or wrong. He is someone who cared so intensely that eventually the contradiction between justice and reality tore him apart. And that is what makes his final decision to trust Yuji so significant. Not because it restores his faith in institutions, not because it magically heals his worldview, but because it proves he is still capable of believing in another human being despite everything he has seen. For someone who spent years staring into human depravity until it consumed him, that small act of trust becomes the closest thing to redemption his character ever received. At the beginning of his story, Higuruma believed he could survive human ugliness through honesty alone. He believed that if he stared directly at depravity without turning away, he could understand it without being destroyed by it. That belief shaped everything about him. The hopeless cases he chose, the clients he defended, and the legal system he willingly entered, despite already knowing how flawed it was. But there is a limit to how much ugliness a person can observe before it begins reshaping the way they see humanity itself. That is the real tragedy of Hiromi Higuruma. Not that the legal system was corrupt, not that innocent people suffered, not even that he became a killer. His tragedy is that prolonged exposure to human selfishness slowly convinced him that judgment was safer than empathy. That is why deadly sentencing matters so much symbolically. At first glance, Higuruma's domain appears to represent justice, a courtroom, evidence, rules, and verdicts. But justice and judgment are not the same thing. Justice requires certainty. It requires the willingness to acknowledge context, contradiction, and the possibility that human beings are more than the worst thing they have done. Judgment is simpler. It reduces people into categories: guilty or innocent, worthy or unworthy, condemnable or absolved. Over time, Higuruma stopped believing human beings deserve the complexity justice requires, so he replaced justice with judgment. And in doing so, he unconsciously became the very thing he once hated: a man standing above others, deciding their worth from inside a rigid system built on punishment. What prevents Higuruma from becoming a complete nihilist is the fact that some part of him never fully abandons morality. Even after everything, he still recognizes his own guilt. He never excuses the murders he committed. He never pretends his suffering gives him moral superiority. Unlike truly cynical people who reduce morality into power or convenience, Higuruma continues carrying the weight of his own action. That burden is what makes Yuji Itadori so important. Yuji does not restore Higuruma's faith in the legal system. He does not suddenly convince him that humanity is good. What Yuji restores is something far smaller and far more fragile: the possibility that people can still choose responsibility even when they gain nothing from it. And for Higuruma, that possibility changes everything, because once even a single person proves that selflessness can exist, cynicism stops functioning as a complete explanation for humanity. The world remains unjust, people remain selfish, institutions remain flawed, but they are no longer the entire story. In the end, Higuruma is not a character about justice alone. He is a character about what happened when someone spent too long staring into humanity's darkness while believing they are strong enough to endure it. For most of his life, Higuruma thought the blindfold worn by Lady Justice symbolized fairness. But by the time he entered the cooling game, he seemed to understand a darker interpretation. Perhaps the blindfold exists so justice does not have to look directly at the people it destroys. The cruel irony is that Higuruma did look, and it nearly destroyed him too.